The Chinese authorities are seeking to end protests against COVID-19 restrictions, which have spread to some of its biggest cities.
Heavy security presence has taken over the streets of Beijing and Shanghai, where there were angry demonstrations over the weekend.
That's right. But this widespread show of resistance to Communist Party rule is one that has not been seen in decades. It's an unprecedented challenge to President Xi Jinping, with some calling on him to resign. For more insight on this, let's speak now with Einar Tangen. He's a senior fellow at Taihe Institute and the chairman of Asia Narratives. Einar, the protests seem to be winding down, even though there remains a heavy police presence on the streets. I mean, is there a chance that they could flare up again? How far do you think the protesters will go?
Well, I don't think it's going to flare up. Obviously, Beijing will be putting in place, as it did last night, basically trying to stop any rally before it starts. They're very sophisticated. In terms of the protesters, they are also very sophisticated. They'll find smaller ways, maybe on the internet, et cetera, to voice their concerns.
At the start of the pandemic, I know China did an incredible job of limiting the spread of what was the unknown and deadly virus at the time through its zero COVID policy. But is it still fit for purpose, given we now have vaccines, we now know how to treat the current strains that are also far less fatal, even if they are more transmissible?
Well, China has an issue that they have not. They need to get 60% of their people with a booster shot or a vaccine within the last 6 months. And they need to especially pay attention to the elderly. The elderly, because they were so successful, the elderly said, why should I get a vaccine? I don't go out very much, and certainly nobody I know has had it. So as a result, its success early on has kind of lent it a problem today, because people just say, well, it's not a big issue. They see the World Cup, and they say, okay, well, why are we doing this any longer? Why don't we just open up? But the fact is, long COVID does exist. There are 300 variants out there, and some of them are able to get around, even vaccines. You still need the vaccines overall. You still need Paxlovid and other treatment forms for when the symptoms become acute. And this is something that China has to come to grips with. Obviously, the program they were using, which is a national policy of zero COVID, but then relying on neighborhood committees to implement, made a very, very uneven checkerboard. Some, it was just unbelievable in the sense that you have one case in a community of 10,000, and they would shut it down. Other places they'd have 5 or 6, but they would use much more surgical tools to do it, just keep people in place. At this juncture, you can expect the Chinese government to have more uniform rules. They've already sent out a number of messages making it clear that they expect a much more surgical approach.
Mm. All right, so Einar, Goldman Sachs is estimating a 30% probability that China will reopen before the second quarter of 2023. Based on your observation, what's your take in considering the economic, political, and social costs resulting from the lockdowns and a strict containment policy?
Well, I agree they're going to try to, but I mean, China's been following the science, and it's difficult to know. I mean, if there's huge surges in cases, they're not just going to say, well, we have a schedule, we're going to open up anyways. But, this idea that somehow China wants to sabotage its own economy, I think is erroneous. Obviously, they put GDP and growth at a very high premium, not above human life, but they certainly are paying a tremendous amount of attention to this. I've seen countless articles and messages being put out by governments at all levels saying, look, we have to bring in more foreign investment. We have to rebuild small, medium-sized enterprises, which create 90% of new jobs, and also 80% of existing jobs, more than 50% of GDP. This is where their real concerns are. The issue is how to get them there and have a safe opening in terms of COVID. They probably should have been more diligent over a year ago when they stopped putting an emphasis on getting boosted or getting more vaccines. They might go to a vaccine mandate, but obviously very, very tricky politically. They don't want to be seen as overbearing. They've actually been very forbearing. They have not done this vaccine mandate, but that might change.
Yeah, they do seem to have boxed themselves into a bit of a corner here. ABC News reported yesterday that the number of new daily cases rose to 40,000, but that 36,500 were asymptomatic. How can authorities realistically convince people that have no symptoms and feel fine that they need to confine themselves to their homes?
Well, obviously, that's one of the challenges that they face. They're right now they're concerned about just opening up the country and then having millions of people die. Right now, the death rates are very, very low. I believe yesterday it was 0 deaths. If that is going to continue, then there's a chance to open up. There's still that lingering issue about long COVID, which we're seeing. What is it? Between 6 and 8% of people who have COVID then experience long COVID, and after 1 year, about 3% are debilitated. They can't work or study or enjoy a normal life. They go from the positive side to the negative side. This is worrisome to China as well as these new variants. So they're trying to take it slow and cautiously. What they don't want to do is give up the gains that they made early on by continuing to grow their economy and keep deaths down. They don't want to just open it up and just say, okay, we don't care about human life anymore. So they're on a tricky thing. As you said, it's kind of a corner. They put themselves into it, but not in a negative way. It was mostly successful. If you start looking at the numbers, less than 6,000 people died. Compare that to the U.S. with over 1 million. Other places, I think you'd have to say that they've been successful. The question is, how do they transition at this point?
Yeah, so what do you think would help to take some of the heat out of this ongoing protests?
Well, I think they need to establish metrics and say to people, look, we have a scientific reality. We have to respond to it. Here's what we plan to do. If we get to 60% vaccination rates or boosted rates within the last 6 months, that will give us an ability to do this. Peer pressure works both ways. And quite frankly, if they can get the Chinese people behind them, as they were, remember they had 95% plus approval ratings for the central government and their handling of the COVID the early years. I think that's the real opportunity. If there are people within the communities are just kind of saying, hey, look, I know you don't like the vaccine, but do this for the team. I think you get a very positive response. Remember, from the Asian point of view, working together for the good of the whole is very, very important. It takes precedence over, quote, I have the freedom not to do whatever I want to do. That has not always worked out, or I don't think it's worked out, period, for a lot of Western democratic nations. There has to be some sort of guidance from the government. This is a pandemic. It's a health emergency. It's not, whether you like the color blue. This is a fact of reality, just like global warming, and there has to be some leadership on it. It's going to be painful. The issue is, how does the government handle it? I think it's, as I said, they really need to get the people on their side, and that means giving them solid metrics. What do you have to do in order for us to open up? That kind of idea.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning, Einar. Einar Tangen there, Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute and Chairman of Asia Narratives.